To me, it feels like 100 years ago that NASA came out with the announcement that we were going back to the moon, the whole Artemis plan, and the attempt to resurrect the magic behind the whole Apollo mission. I mean, I was so enthusiastic about this in spite of all the problems I had with SLS and everything else. Finally, we were going to make a serious attempt to not only go to the moon, but go to Mars, a whole model that I could really get behind. Once again, even though I had problems with SLS and I didn't really believe that it was sustainable, I did believe that this was the right way for NASA to proceed and for us to finally get back out there in the stars. But guess what? That isn't really what's happening. Not at all. This isn't bearing any kind of resemblance whatsoever to the kind of national enthusiasm that we had to go to the moon back in the 1960s. It bears no resemblance to it whatsoever. And this can be borne out by the fact that Elon Musk, virtually the only guy that's putting all of his effort into getting us back out into the solar system, is being told that he needs to do this: invest $6 billion of his personal fortune in feeding the homeless and feeding the hungry across the world, feeding the desperate, which is something that I have always supported. I have always believed in. I applaud the people who go to third world countries and try to solve what seems to be an unsolvable problem. But these are the sorts of things that are dominating our news headlines today, not the excitement about going back to the moon, but rather how greedy guys like Elon Musk need to be investing their money in solving the problems of world hunger. And as much as I like the idea of solving world hunger, $6 billion is not going to do it. The money that it would take to get us back to the moon is not going to do it. In fact, money alone is not going to do it, period. So it is far from surprising that recently on November 9th it was announced that we are not going back to the moon until 2025 at the earliest. And honestly, I think this is an optimistic estimate. Bill Nelson made it very clear that NASA is not getting the funding that they require to accomplish their goals, that there are serious technological challenges that still remain in front of us, and to make matters even worse, guys who are theoretically behind this idea, and yeah, I'm talking to you, Jeff, are actually holding up the process because they are so damn determined to put their personal stamp on returning to the moon and their own legacy. And that is the only thing they really give a damn about, as opposed to the overall good of mankind. My name is Jordan Wright. I was born in the same year that the human race took its first steps on the surface of another world, and then we promptly betrayed those people's legacy by never going back. But now, over half a century later, there's a new breed of pioneers that are seeking to finish what these people set out to do so long ago. But there is trouble as well, so it's time for commentators like me to stop being polite and start getting angry. So recently, David Beasley, the director of the UN's World Food Program, got his 15 seconds of fame when he said, quote, $6 billion to help 42 million people that are literally going to die if we don't reach them. It's not complicated, unquote, while targeting Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos as sources of income to make all of this happen. But Elon replied, I think, with a very good question as to explain to me exactly how $6 billion is going to solve the problem right now, and I will donate the money immediately. And this is, as I said, a very legitimate question, because money alone is never going to solve this problem. There are so many issues that cause the kinds of famine that exist on this planet. I'm not going to go into great detail, but there are two massive things: government corruption in these countries and infrastructure. And both of those things are issues that are simply not going to be solved with $6 billion. As my country learned recently in Afghanistan, investing billions upon billions of dollars in a corrupt nation simply does not yield results. Instead, troop numbers were misreported by the Afghan government, and these corrupt officials pocketed insane amounts of money that were supposed to go to defend the people of Afghanistan. And as a result, the Taliban once again control that country. On top of that, the road networks that are necessary to get the food to the people who need it do not exist in these countries. Highways need to be built. Infrastructure needs to be built out. And how the hell do you do that when the presidents and dictators of these countries are building massive presidential palaces for themselves, paying off their warlord buddies so they don't get overthrown, and investing money in armored personnel carriers and fighter bombers to suppress their populations, who are usually in a state of revolt for understandable reasons? How is $6 billion going to solve all of these issues? Why is the same amount of pressure not being put on these corrupt leaders? It makes no sense whatsoever. This is a highly complicated issue, one that cannot be solved with huge amounts of financial investment, as Live Aid taught us many decades ago. Okay, I've said what I'm going to say about that, so let's get back to Artemis here. What's holding it up? What are the problems? Well, as many problems as SLS has had, in my opinion, SLS is actually on the verge, on the very cusp of being able to get to the moon and get astronauts to the moon. The Orion capsule has proven itself to be a highly effective space capsule in spite of its relatively conservative nature, and it's already gone to orbit, already re-entered. Life support seems to be taken care of. Really, everything involved in the SLS equation of Artemis seems to be resolved, aside from the massive expense. But this is where things start to get a lot more complicated, because unlike Apollo, Orion obviously is unable to put astronauts on the lunar surface and will never be able to do so. Instead, it needs to rendezvous with something else in lunar orbit. A landing system to begin with, perhaps, but a lunar gateway or orbiting lunar space station is the better solution, as I have always argued. Lots of people seem to have a problem with Lunar Gateway. I do not. Once we have a space station in orbit around the moon, it's going to be a lot more difficult to abandon it. It's something that's going to maintain human presence in orbit. But Lunar Gateway is a long ways away from being deployed, and it's going to be less expensive for a variety of reasons, but primarily because it's going to be deployed by Falcon Heavy instead of SLS, which is a really good solution. But aside from that, there aren't complete modules for this station yet. There's a lot of things that still need to be resolved. Now, this station is going to give us access to the entire surface of the moon. Its rectilinear halo orbit is very well set up in order to maintain an orbiting infrastructure for the future of our exploration of the lunar surface. It is a fantastic solution overall, just as you require infrastructure in order to solve world hunger. You need infrastructure in order to maintain a permanent presence on the moon. So the gateway is a huge thing that still needs to be invested in, still needs to be completed, hell, still needs to be thoroughly designed before it's going to go. And then, of course, we have the human landing system issue. And as you can see, the whole lunar capsule concept or landings craft has changed drastically since this video was originally made. Now we have Lunar Starship handling that, although even all of that has been held up because of the very people who are supposedly going to be spearheading our return to the moon, and that, of course, is Blue Origin and Jeff Bezos. For 6 months, Blue Origin and the national team held up the whole HLS program in court. NASA could not invest the $2.9 billion that they wanted to invest in Lunar Starship because Jeff thought that this damn thing was the best solution for landing on the moon. And thank God, this thing will never see the light of day. That, at least, has been thoroughly resolved. It is a 2/3 non-reusable capsule that would have cost insane amounts of money in the long run and was also fundamentally unsafe on top of other significant drawbacks. So thank God this is done. However, is Blue Origin out of the HLS race? No, they are not at all. Appendix N, in spite of the fact that Blue Origin publicly said that this particular part of the HLS contract was not going to work, in spite of the fact that they trashed this entire concept on their own website, they have an active proposal that was accepted by NASA, and NASA invested millions of dollars in an as-yet unseen new Blue Origin lander. Who knows, maybe it's going to be a great concept, but I would be really hesitant if I were NASA in getting involved with Blue Origin again in the whole HLS thing, but that's where they are. They've got millions invested in Appendix N and whatever new project they come out with, and it's not just them, it's all of the rest of the national team partners as well, who have gone their own separate ways and are coming up with their own designs. Now, people like Dynetics, they also are in the mix. They got actually the biggest investment from NASA for the Appendix N portion of the HLS project, and for good reason. As I have always said, this is now a 100% reusable lander. The whole drop tank concept is done. So Dynetics, I think, is still a very strong contender and should be, because as much as SpaceX fans might dislike the concept of further competition in HLS, that competition should still exist, because we have no guarantee that Lunar Starship and all the on-orbit refueling and everything else that it's going to require is going to be technologically feasible or practical. So there needs to be another solution in place. But here's the problem. NASA has not been given enough money to fund one HLS program, let alone two. As I am recording this particular segment of the video, SN20 is actually preparing for a static fire, or at least that's what I'm being told. There's tank farm venting at the moment and such, all very exciting, but here's my point. Elon Musk needs to be investing the lion's share of the money in Lunar Starship if this is actually going to happen. This entire project is going to be far too expensive for NASA to afford without Elon's personal investment. Unless congressional funding for HLS changes radically, all of the infrastructure and all of the vehicles that need to be built in order for Starship to work as far as an HLS system is concerned is going to be far too expensive for NASA to afford without Elon's personal help. And it's as simple as that. And here's the problem. Elon is getting all of this pressure to invest his money in earthbound issues? Don't we have tons of people doing that already? Why does he need to be the main target on this sort of issue? Without his personal investment in Lunar Starship, all the on-orbit refueling, all of the life support solutions, everything that's going to have to be put into place to turn Lunar Starship from what it is right now with SN20 into something that's actually going to carry astronauts down to the lunar surface is going to require an insane amount of money, far more than $2.9 billion, and Elon seems quite content to invest in this personally, but he's not getting a whole lot of love from the general public as a result, and I frankly am sick of it. Back in the 60s, did we have the Hunt family or the Kennedys or hell, even Howard Hughes investing huge amounts of their own money and getting us to the moon? No, we had the government doing that. And now we don't, not even close to the amount of money that we need to return to the moon. And here we have a private citizen who wants to invest his own personal money in doing this. And guess what? He's getting all sorts of hate for it instead of appreciation. And like I said, we need to change our mindset, otherwise we are never going back to the moon as a species. There is a huge value in going to space. It's been proven time and again. I have made video after video about it on this channel, and it simply needs to stop this whole public resistance to what Elon is doing. And we have more problems beyond just HLS. We have spacesuits that are not ready, are not going to be ready by 2024, are not getting the funding that are required, and as I have said many times, may not even be very practical for our long-term purposes. But guess what? We're stuck with this issue as well, and nobody seems to give a damn. And all of this is why, in my opinion, Bill Nelson on November 9th had this to say, quote, "After having taken a good look under the hood these past 6 months, it's clear to me that the agency will need to make serious changes for the long-term success of this program," unquote. And he couldn't be more right, because with the funding that he has available, with his back to the wall, he knows that the cost of all of these things needs to come down radically, otherwise it's just not going to work in the long term. But this just isn't a problem about NASA's investment in the moon or their ability to build rockets and build capsules and build landing systems affordably. It's also about the government buy-in, the buy-in from the public, people who have no damn idea that we're even going back to the moon or that we haven't been there for half a century. Nobody seems to know about these things. So yeah, the Orion capsule has gone up from $6.7 billion to $9.3 billion, $11 billion on SLS. Okay, big deal. Compared to so many other government projects, this is a tiny amount of funding, a pathetic amount of funding. In adjusted dollars, Apollo cost far more. And here's the most ridiculous thing of all. Do you know who really has buy-in as far as going to the moon is concerned and gaining control of cislunar space and dominating mankind's expansion into the solar system? The People's Republic of China, and Administrator Nelson recognizes that as well. He is very aware of the fact that under our current circumstances, with the current lack of focus on this program, China will be the one dominating our expansion into space and not NASA. Quote, "It's the position of NASA and I believe the United States government," I think he's taking a bit of a stretch there, "that we want to be there first, back on the moon after over half a century," unquote. Well, I hope you're right there, Nelson, because I'll tell you, it's not something that I feel very optimistic about. And it's not just that. There are more developmental things that need to happen with this as well. Quote, "We've got a lot of stuff to do on the moon, including building habitats and learning how we're going to exist for long periods of time in that environment in order to prepare us to take astronauts to Mars," unquote. So in the meantime, Administrator Nelson has made it very clear that we are going to go forward with what we currently have while looking for SLS alternatives that are going to be less expensive and looking into other less expensive solutions to put us on the moon. But you can only do so much when it comes to all of this. You can't go back to the moon, especially to stay on the cheap. It's simply not possible. So if we want to go back to the moon, well, to use Mr. Beasley's words, it's not complicated. Congress needs to invest money in SLS and Orion while developing a less expensive solution in parallel with SLS, and I'm confident that that can be done. A new HLS system, or rather the system that we're going to be using, that has to be invested in, otherwise we can't land on the moon. New suits, new environmental suits need to be developed, otherwise we can't set foot on the moon, and structures and long-term habitats need to be designed and constructed on the moon, otherwise we can't stay on the moon, and a space station needs to be created in lunar orbit so that we can have the infrastructure to support these stations. All of these things need to be invested in, none of them are cheap, and if we're not willing to do it, then we may as well call the whole damn thing off and just surrender the moon and the solar system to the People's Republic of China and all of the huge consequences that would go with that. If we don't want that to happen, then this whole project needs to be wholeheartedly invested in. And in the meantime, people like Elon Musk, who are willing to invest billions of their own money in returning us to the moon and elsewhere in the solar system, people need to stop looking a gift horse in the mouth, as we say over here, and appreciate the fact that this time we actually have incredibly wealthy people who have incomes in excess of some of the incomes of nations on this planet willing to help us go back to the solar system and expand out into the stars as we were supposed to do half a century ago. Shut up, stop complaining about these things, and look for solutions to our earthbound problems elsewhere, because there are lots of other wealthy people who are not investing in space who could do a lot about those issues. If you like what I have to say, if you like these particular kinds of rants, well, this content can't continue without your support. It's all in the description, many ways to support me, or if you're unable to support me financially, I would very much like a like and subscribe. That would be very much appreciated. So until the American people, until Congress, until the people of the world recognize that going back to the moon is a worthwhile thing, something that's just as worth investing in as world hunger, until we understand that these things matter as well, I urge all of you to stay angry about space.